Hi and welcome back to Tysons Enduro Workshop. Today we're going, or in this video I should say, maybe not today, but I'm going to be doing the top end on the Gasgas engine, part of the project that I've been doing. So I've already taken the exhaust power valve covers off there. I've disconnected the linkage here to get into the bolts underneath, and I've actually cracked those nuts on the bottom of the cylinder. There is a little clip on this linkage here, so make sure you get that before you try and pull it off. And we'll just get into stripping this thing down, giving it a clean up and dropping a new piston in there. So we'll see how we go with all that. So I'll just get right into it. I am going to take the head off this just to give it a good clean. We'll probably remove the power valves as well. You do not have to actually take the head off or the power valves out if you don't want to, but it is a good idea to give everything in there a good clean up. So spark plug out first, and then I'll just go through and take out all the head bolts. So there we have the head off. Set that to one side for now. Next we'll be doing the cylinder. It turns out you do have to take that little ball coupling off the power valve arm to get the cylinder off. Kind of forgot about that. Cylinder off. And there we have the piston in there. Just going to lift that to the top. I do have some sideways play in the con rod there, but no up and down movement. Anyway, we'll measure that. Before I do much else, I'm just going to stuff a bunch of rags in around there to make sure we don't get anything in there. So the next thing we're going to do is just pop out the little C-clip in here, slide the gudgeon pin out, and we'll pull this old piston off and see where we are then. Sorry the camera's on the wrong side, but it's about the only spot I can get it to sit while I do this. Just use a little bit of a screwdriver, and watch your eyes because these do have a bit of a habit of flying out sometimes. And there's the C-clip there. Generally you only have to pull one side of these out, and then usually, all going well, you can just slide that gudgeon pin out by hand. Come on. Halfway there. There we have the piston off and the little end bearing there. This piston is a little bit black on top. It doesn't seem to have any real obvious scoring on it, which is a good thing. And not looking very cooked on the inside either. A little bit of marking in there, but that, I would say that's probably more just fuel staining rather than burn marks. But anyway, that's that out. Everything's got a nice coating of oil, which is always good to see. So yeah, that's pretty much half the job done. Now I just do a bit of work getting this gasket off here, clean up those surfaces, and then we might go into the cylinder and the head. So to get this gasket off, I'm just going to use a bit of a razor blade. Be very careful not to mark the surfaces here, and you can just sort of gently go around and get as much of that gasket off as you can get. Okay, so I've got most of that gasket off now. I'm just going to use a bit of parts cleaner and just gently keep working on all the little bits that are left behind until we get that all nice and clean. And then we have it all nice and clean. Take your time with that and make sure you do get it clean. It's a very important mating surface there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just measure and check the conrod here. I am just going to gently, well, rather firmly pull straight up and down. I do have a bit of sideways play, again that's not really an issue, but I'm trying to feel for up and down play. Sometimes that's easier with it down the bottom as well, might give you a bit of a better feel. I definitely can't feel any up and down play, which is good. That means this bottom end is still alright relatively. And the other thing we're going to check is using some feeler gauges. We'll just measure the clearance between those washers there and the connecting rod itself. Going by the manual, the standard is 0.8 of a millimeter and maximum wear limit's 1 millimeter. I've had a quick look already. We're definitely under 1 millimeter, so I'll just try and get an exact number on that. It's a bit tricky holding the camera. But yeah, if you do want to measure those, pretty much just push the crank to one side as far as you can get it and measure the clearance gap down in between there. But so far things are looking good. Got a good coating of oil on everything down here on the crank journals and stuff, so and a good bit of oil down the bottom there I can see as well, so everything in here is looking pretty good. Considering that this engine's close to 400 hours now, that's a very good sign. So the next thing I'm just going to have a quick look at here is the head. Do have a little bit of carbon deposits here on the exhaust side. No pitting in the combustion chamber, so we haven't had any detonation problems. It's all looking pretty good. I'm just going to give this a bit of a clean up and clean off the gasket faces here. Just give that all a bit of a quick tidy up, but that's looking good. The other thing that I'm going to have a quick look at, this is the water spigot off the top of the head there. I scraped these gasket surfaces here. They didn't look exactly flat. So one little trick that I have learnt, get yourself a nice big thick bit of glass and a bit of emery paper, and you put the emery paper on top, a little bit of brake cleaner, and you can use that to actually face your parts a little bit. You're not trying to take metal off, just to make sure they're nice and smooth and flat. Go in a nice sort of circular or figure eight pattern. You can use that on various surfaces wherever you think you might have a bit of an issue, or you just want to make sure that they're flat. But that does work very well. Just make sure your glass is nice and thick and on a good flat surface, bit of a cloth underneath, and that tends to work really well. And after a very quick time, you can see the difference we've got there, beautiful and shiny. All the surfaces are nicely smoothed, so yeah, that's good to go. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just remove the power valve assembly. Mine is working quite freely, so I'm thinking a bit of a clean up and hopefully we can put it all back together. It's just a process of pulling out these side bearings. On both sides we have the retaining bolts there. All going well, your bearings sort of fall out. They're usually not jammed in too badly. Also going to pull off the breather spigots on both sides, give them a clean out, and we'll basically just go over this whole thing and clean all the bits. So we'll just get stuck into that now. So there we have one side out. Here's the other side. We have a pin inside here, which I think you can just pull out from memory. Actually feels a little bit jammed in there, which is interesting. And there's another pin in this bolt hole here, which you just sort of punch through. So we'll try and get that one out now too. Okay, so there's the power valve flapper itself. That comes out from the inside, but you actually have to turn it sideways in the little space that it's in to get it out. So that's a bit tricky. That's pretty gunky and needs a damn good cleanup. So hopefully it'll be a bit easy to get it back in. Rightio, so I spent all of yesterday afternoon just going through and cleaning some stuff up, ready for reassembly. This is the cylinder. It's looking pretty good. I pretty much just used some standard super cheap auto degreaser in an aerosol can, sprayed that on, hit it all with the pressure washer, did that a couple of times. It's come up really good. Obviously not 100% perfect, but a hell of a lot better than it was, and that's certainly serviceable. Made sure I cleaned out all the intake ports, the water jackets, inside the power valve as best as I could. You can see inside there is actually pretty good. The spigot here is still a little bit dirty, but I've given that a scrape, so it's pretty smooth. So that's all come up really well. Cylinder's still looking pretty good. I can't really feel any lips in there or anything like that, so that's all good to go. I did chuck my head in the ultrasonic cleaner. I don't know if you remember, but this was actually black. It turns out the ultrasonic cleaner eats paint. I'm not sure if that's because of the solvent that I'm using in there, which is only CT14. This is actually kind of looking really good, I think. Took all the paint off beautifully. It just sort of bubbled, and I took that off with the pressure washer. The power valve covers also did the same thing. And this is the little spigot on top here, which is also losing its paint. So I'm not too worried about that. I think this will all look pretty trick. All nice and silver. I'm going to run this through a few more times yet and see if I can get that cleaned right up. Did all the bolts from the head and stuff, and the cylinder bolts. They've all come out looking really nice. Very clean. Copper washers are all nice and shiny again. There was a little bit of black staining on some sides of these bolts. I'm not sure what that is. It doesn't seem to be corrosion or rust or anything. So, but anyway, all the threads are nice and clean, so they're all good to go. And I spent quite a bit of time just playing around with the power valve. This thing was completely caked up. I might do a little bit more work on this, but even in the ultrasonic cleaner, not much moved. I pretty much had to scrape this, done a little bit of sanding, bit of wire brush work, chip some bits off, so they've come up all right. Same with the boost port valves, I guess these are. They were really badly caked as well, just in carbon deposits, but I've given them a good clean up, so they're all looking good to go. The pins that go through the power valve, they're all quite nice and shiny. A little bit of heat tempering marks on there, but that's all right. So ultrasonic cleaner still kicking ass there. So bearings were looking good in the power valve. I've just given them a bit of a rudimentary clean. Still a little bit dirty, but they seem to be running very nicely still, so we'll just drop those back in and reuse those. So yeah, we're nearly ready for reassembling the top end. Rightio, so we've got everything nice and clean. Cylinders come up beautifully. All the bits sitting here, so we'll have a go at trying to get this back together. The first thing I'm going to do is just get the power valve assembly installed back into the cylinder. So we'll start with that now and see how I go with it. Again, this is quite fiddly sometimes, and you do have to remember which way everything went, so I'm pretty good with that stuff though usually. So first thing, we'll drop the flapper down into there and see if I can get that spun around back into position, because we do have to put that in sideways. Okay, I got the flapper in, a little bit fiddly. You can see it hanging down inside there, I hope. Let's see. And just verify it's moving up and down nice. As I'm assembling all of this, I'm just putting a little bit of two-stroke oil out of a syringe in it to make sure everything's lubricated right from the word go. So yeah, next step. Again, all of this stuff's going to be a little bit fiddly. We'll put the far side booster port in. That's got a little hole for the other pin, which will actually slide in the flapper itself, and that's pretty much how it actuates, is actually off these little boost ports. So again, I'll try and remember which way this actually goes. I'm pretty sure it does only go in one way. A little bit of two-stroke oil just on all the surfaces here. Not going to go crazy with that. Little dollop in the end there, make sure there's some on there as well. This just ensures when you first start it up that everything's well lubricated before you start putting any load on anything. Drop that in. And also the two bearings on this side here. Just make sure they're still running nice. And I'll put just a little dribble of oil inside these as well. So I think that was the inside one. A little dribble in here as well. I'm not going to do the outside of these because that should be where the mating surfaces are. So we can push that in. And I'll just quickly tip out all the nuts and bolts. If I can find the right one. Pretty sure it's that one, and the washer. Go on this outside here. I'm going to put a little dollop of Loctite on those as well, just to make sure that they don't move anyway. I'm just using blue Loctite, so I've got half a chance of getting this out again. What Loctite bottle? Maybe I haven't opened it. There we go, that might work a bit better. Oh, definitely looks a bit better. So we'll just screw this side here in. That one's loaded up, this one now. I think it's like that, looks like that. Do that one up fairly tight. A lot of vibration in here, but again, it is aluminium, so don't go crazy with it all. And now I should be able to get this little shaft here. Again, just a little bit of two-stroke oil on there. So this is going to go down through the flapper and into the hole in that boost port, if I can get it to line up right. That's definitely in there now, and you can already, well, you might not be able to see, but if I turn that far side, I can already see it actuating the flapper there. So we've got that in the right spot. And then just the outside bit that's connected to the linkage control of all this. So again, just a little dollop of two-stroke all over this. Nothing too crazy. You put too much two-stroke in on this installation side of things, you end up with it everywhere. So and now let's see if we can get that one to go into this hole. There we go, that drops in. Just verify that that moves. We've got our arm on the right side there. That's all looking pretty good. Moving very nicely in there as well. Make sure that's nice and free. So now we should be able to put the stopper bolt on the other side. Again, just a little bit of Loctite in there. And there we have the power valve installed. That's moving quite freely, so there shouldn't be any problems there. It's all feeling really good, and it's definitely moving correctly inside. Okay, so the next step is, before we assemble anything too much, I've got the brand new rings here and the new piston. I'm just going to check the end gap on the rings in the bore to make sure they're within spec. This is going to be a bit fiddly as well. Basically the idea is to just do one ring at a time, sit it in the bore, then using the piston gently push it down, keeping it nice and square till you get sort of, I don't know, maybe just above your exhaust ports, but you certainly want it down the bore a little bit before you do any measuring. And then we'll just use the feeler gauge just to measure the end gap between those rings when it's compressed and in situation, and make sure that that's in spec. So that one's coming in at 0.35 mil. And that one is too. Okay, so going by that, these are about 0.5 mil too tight. It's not uncommon for rings to be not quite on spec even out of the box, so I've just got myself a nice little fairly smooth little file here, and I'm just going to carefully rub it across those end gaps a little bit. We really don't have to take too much off here at all to bring them back out to the spec required. Try not to bend anything. And just keep doing that process, checking them again, make sure they're nice and clean. After you do give them a file, before you put them in the barrel there, give all that a quick little dust off, get my clean rag, and I'll just check those again. Okay, so I'm not going to lie about this. This is probably the trickiest part of rebuilding any engine. Basically what the trick is getting our little C-clips into the piston. The first one's definitely a bit easier than the second one, but either way, these things have got a bad habit of flying away. There is a bit of technique to doing them. Unfortunately, I don't do pistons often enough to practice that technique regularly. So we'll see how we go. There's a few important points to consider. Pistons always have an arrow on them that always goes towards the exhaust port, no matter what. The other thing with these C-clips is to make sure that the opening is either directly at the 6 o'clock or directly at the 12 o'clock positions in the gudgeon holes there. Once you get them in, you can slide them a little bit sometimes, but it's easier if you can try and get them lined up as close to that as you can get it when you're first putting them in. So the first step is to get one in. I'm going to go put it on the back side here, and that'll give me access to this side a bit easier once the piston's actually sitting in the engine. So I'll go ahead and do that. See how I go and whether I make these clips fly away. I'll see if I can film this without taking too long. The general trick I've found is to just sort of try and squeeze them in a little bit. Even that's going to be tricky. There's usually quite a bit of tension on these. get them in as far as you can. And then with a small screwdriver, I like to try and get them in close to the groove. There's one in. There's the other end in. And then I might need a slightly longer screwdriver here. Actually, I'll just use that. Push that top of that ring back until it clicks into place. It's a pretty good click that you'll hear. So there's one in there, and by the looks of this I need to rotate that clip just a fraction. Try not to mark up anything in the bore here. That's much better looking. I'm just going to check that that's sitting in all the way, which it is. Rightio, clip one done. That is the easier one. Okay, so now we're ready for the bottom end. Make sure you've got some rags stuffed around your conrod. You don't want anything falling in that bottom end while you're assembling this here. That's very important. Okay, little end bearing, always make sure that you use a brand new one of these. For the Gasgas, this is just a Pro X one. It actually fits a YZ250 and a YZ250X. So it's 18 by 22 millimeters by 22 millimeters. And can you see that? There's the part number. Pretty common bearing. Pull that out of its packet. Your gudgeon pin here. Just get that out of the packet as well. Set that in a clean surface. Rightio, I think we're about ready to start with this. So first thing I'm going to do is just a little bit of 2-stroke oil on the little end bearing straight up. Give that a good little wipe over, and we can sit that inside there like that. Next, just going to grab the gudgeon pin, and again, a little bit of 2-stroke oil on that. Give that a good wipe around, make sure it's all nicely coated. Try and keep your fingers as clean as you can while you're doing this, because when you comes to put those clips in, you really need to have clean fingers. So arrow pointing towards the exhaust, just going to sit that over the top, and with any luck, just sort of push that in past the first journal like that, and then you can just sit that whole thing over, again making sure you've got the arrow pointing the right way. And a bit of wiggling. Oh, this is tight. Just slide that through that little end bearing in there. There we go. And I'll just make sure I push that in all the way till it's seated on the clip on the other side. So there we have the new piston sitting there. Now I'm going to just quickly give my fingers a good clean here, make sure I don't have any oil on them, and we'll try and get this second circlip in. This one's always the tricky one. So again, I'll try and line it up so it's pretty much in the right position to start off with. Push that top in as far as I can get it. And usually with a little bit of luck, you can get those two little bottom lips there to pop in. Might need a little bit of help on this one. Very careful not to mark the outside surface of your piston, or mark any surface of your piston really. Clip, clip, and just make sure that's in the top properly as well. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, so the next thing is to put the rings onto the piston itself. If you have a look at the back of the piston here, you'll see two little pins in each ring groove. That's where the ends of the actual ring sit, so where the ring gap will be. They're slightly misaligned, so pay attention to that. I'm going to put a bit more two-stroke oil just in those ring grooves straight up. Oop. Try not to make too much of a mess doing this, and you want to make sure that that's spread right around those ring grooves right from the word go. Okay, that's looking good. And first ring. Some rings you'll find will actually have a little number. It's usually an N stamped on one side of the ring and not the other side. If it does have those, the letters go up. These ones don't, so they're pretty much multi-directional. So yeah, we'll just put them in now. Just going to double make sure I can't feel any burrs on those lips there from where I gave them a bit of a file, but they're feeling good. And so I will just very gently put the bottom ring in first. So I'm getting in there. Be very gentle doing this. You don't want to scratch anything, you don't want to contort your rings at all. It's in the top groove. See if we can get him to jump back out into that bottom groove. Like that. Give him a little bit of a twist in there. Make sure I've got a good coating of oil underneath it. And I'll line that up with the little pin on that side, just roughly for now. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing with the other ring. And there we have them. Now have the rings on the piston there. So now is when we can actually take these rags out. We're not in any danger of dropping anything else down into the bottom end there now. Make sure that everything's nice and clean in here. It's all looking good. I'm actually going to put just a little dollop on the big end there as well, seeing as I've had this apart. That looks good. Next thing, I'm going to slip on the base gasket. This one's a 0.5mm thick one. There is a bit of tuning that you can do changing base gaskets, but unless you really know what you're doing and chasing, I would suggest sticking with whatever was in there originally. I think 0.5mm is standard. Drop that on. And that's all looking good as well. Okay, next little fiddly bit. Get the cylinder. This is all nice and clean. Just going to put a good coating of two-stroke oil inside there. I'm going to have to fill up my syringe a little bit more maybe. Make sure everything is nice and clean while you're assembling. That's one important point. Let's see if I've got enough two-stroke in here. So I want a good smear of that whole way around the inside of your barrel. Now again, this can be a bit tricky at times. You kind of need three hands to do this. What I found is if you slowly line up your rings in roughly the right spot first and slowly work them down, because you have to actually compress those rings as you sit the barrel on. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, and there is a bit of a knack and a technique to it. I find you can use this flat groove here or the flat part of the cylinder to help hold the rings in place while you press them on this side. So it's also a good idea to have the piston up as high as you can get it, just when you're starting that off. So we'll go for the first one there. That's gone in. And then I'll line up that second ring with its pin. And just gently, gently, gently slide the cylinder over like that until the rings are inside. That's looking good. And now it's just a matter of lining everything up slowly as you're doing this without pulling the piston back out. Make sure you get that power valve rod through the cylinder where it needs to go, which I'll do now. Something like that. It should be out of the way there. Gasket's looking like it's sitting in a good spot. And pop. All back together. Well, not all back together, but we've got the cylinder on the engine anyway. Now we can just put back in the cylinder bolts, nuts I should say, to hold the cylinder on. One thing that I have learnt is just have a look at all of your nuts and pick the best two looking ones to go in the exhaust ports at the front. They're way trickier to get in and out, and you certainly don't want any slightly worn corners on any of the nuts. Ideally you shouldn't be using any nuts with worn corners at all, but the back ones are far easier to get a socket onto, a nice 6-sided socket, whereas the front ones you pretty much have to use a ring spanner, so that's just something worth considering. I have to spin the engine around to get to those ones. It's also worth noting that perhaps just a little bit of oil on those threads is not a bad thing either. Rightio, now we can just go through and tighten up all the bolts. Try and do it in a bit of a crisscross pattern, and probably go around a couple of times to make sure they're all nice and even. I'm sure there's probably some specific torque to do these two. There's no way you can get a torque wrench into these two front ones to start off with, so I just do them up nice and bloody tight. If you can, use a 6-sided socket, particularly, yeah, just use a 6-sided socket where you can get it, and unfortunately you can only use a ring spanner on these front ones, so I'll just go through and do that first. I know the one on this side here is probably the trickiest one to get into. Now, before you go any further, just double check that your piston is in there right. You don't want your rings hooking up on any of those ports, so just grab your Kickstarter, just sit him on, and just give the whole engine a couple of nice rotations. Just make sure that's moving nice and easily, no bad noises. The other thing you can do is, when it's at bottom dead center, just see where your piston is in relation to your exhaust port. It should be pretty much in line with it. If it's really badly out, you've probably got the wrong gasket in there, but that's lining up almost spot on, and it's, yeah, kicking over beautifully. So I'm happy with that. Rightio, we're pretty much ready to drop the head on there now. I just had to sort through my O-ring collection to find the head O-rings that are the right size, but anyway, I think I've got them now. We'll see how we go. One trick I've learnt with these, they can be a bit of a bugger to get to stay in place sometimes. So what I found is just get a little bit of rubber grease and just give them a very gentle coating the whole way around them. And all that does is just, when you sit them in place, just sort of sticks them in there a little bit and stops them from trying to jump out of their groove while you're putting everything together. Just like that. Don't really want too much grease on any of the faces, and just make sure they are sitting in their groove properly and staying in there. The worst thing you can have happen is one of these jump out of the groove while you're trying to put the head on. So I'll do the same with the outer one. The other thing is sometimes they do feel a little bit tight in those grooves and do want to pop out. Just giving them a little bit of a stretch while you're putting your rubber grease on there to warm up the rubber and just stretch them that fraction can also help. So, okay, there we go. I've got both the O-rings sitting in there. This one is going to try and jump out now. They're going to sit there for a second. A little bit of grease in there really does help. Then I'm just going to line up my head. I don't really want to twist this or anything, just sit it straight in there. Hopefully those O-rings won't bloody move. So looking nice and flush the whole way around. So I'm pretty confident those O-rings are still sitting in their grooves. They should be pretty right there, I think. And just going to keep holding that head down while I whack in a few of the head bolts just to make sure nothing moves in there. Oh yeah, that should just hold those head O-rings in there. I'll just go through now and stick the rest. So I just checked the manual on these head bolts to get the torque specs. It's 25 Newton meters. Interestingly, the manual says to put Loctite on these head bolts. I don't think I've ever actually done that before in the past, but seeing as we've come across it, I'm just going to go through and whip these out quickly and put a little dollop of thread lock on each one. Not sure if that recorded, so I'll just make sure. I'm just going to go around and using my torque wrench, make sure all of these are up to torque, 25 Newton meters. Make sure you use a star pattern around them. Yep. Oh, engine's twisting on me a little bit. And they're all looking good, up to spec. So we're pretty much there. I've just screwed in a spark plug finger tight just to make sure it stays all nice and clean in there. Pretty much all we have left to do. Put in the little spigot drains for the crankcase breather and power valve cover breather. I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on those just because they've got a bad habit of coming loose. And then just the ball coupling on the power valve actuator arm. With it out, you can actually see the little hole in the back where that funny little clip goes up through there, and then it clips around here. So yeah, just easy to see that while it's out. And have to put the water pump spigot on top. I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to have another bash at chucking this through the ultrasonic cleaner. I think it's going to look better if it's all nice and shiny with all this black paint taken right off, so we'll give that another run in there before I install that. But that's pretty simple, just a new gasket and do your bolts back up again. But that's pretty close to it. Power valve covers on, obviously, with new gaskets in those. And that should be right. So, but that's pretty much how you do a top end. I hope that's helpful. I'll probably leave that for this video. This is going to be dragging on a bit otherwise. I hope you like my content. I hope this is helpful to you. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share if you do like my content. Please do that on YouTube too if you can. It just helps with the algorithms a bit, and it does help sort of keep me going doing these videos. Just hearing back from you guys. If there's any questions or queries or any comments about how I've done anything, please leave a comment. I do like reading those. Just lets me know that people are actually watching my videos, I guess. Bye for now. Actually, before I go, I will just show you the installation of the little ball coupling here. Just there is a few interesting points with that. One thing, do not play with this actuator arm too much, pulling it up and down. If you do, you can open the spring mechanism inside your power valve down in here and actually make all the ball bearings in there fall out. So try not to play with that too much when you're doing any of this stuff. The thing that's important is to try and adjust this little coupling up as much as you can get it, so the power valve is as far up when it's in its standard position, and then it will open it as it pulls itself down. So when you're doing this, there's a little lock nut on the end here. You screw the coupling on and then do the lock nut up tight. You want a good couple of threads in this. It is metal, thank goodness, but they are awfully small threads. There really isn't a lot of room there to play with. So when you're doing this, just try to get that power valve shut as far as you can get it, and have this hook on there quite easily. So we'll just screw that on. There's always a little bit of play in these things, as you can see, and I'm not going to get much more than that really without having it starting to be opened. Let's push that all the way up. I might get one more twist on that maybe, and yeah, that's about all I'm going to get. So when you're doing this, just do check that, and then it's just simply a matter of with your little spanners holding that coupling in the right position, and then doing the lock nut up underneath to make sure that all stays tight and in position. It can't really turn because it is clipped on there, but it's still good practice. Get that up nice and tight like that. So when that just sits on there, the power valve is pretty much shut as far as it'll go. So just something worth noting. And I will just show you quickly this silly little clip setup. It's a fiddly little damn thing. But basically there's a hole in the back there. So you put the long end through the hole with the ball joint in place. Well, if you have everything lined up right, it should just slide through like that. Just quickly, the other thing I forgot to mention is put a little bit of a dollop of grease on here. I'm just going to use a little bit of molly grease, just a little dob. Had actually done that, I just forgot to show you guys, so anyway. Good luck with it all.